The cowboy had always lived with a quiet solitude that seemed carved into his very being, a life shaped by long days under the relentless sun and longer nights filled only with the whispers of the wind across his lonely ranch. Years of loss and disappointment had taught him that dreams of family were fragile, that hearts could break quietly and invisibly if given the chance. And so, he built walls around his emotions, convincing himself that solitude was safer than love. His days passed in routine, feeding the cattle, mending fences, and riding across the endless expanse of land that no one else would claim, the rhythm of his life steady but hollow. Yet despite the armor he had forged around his heart, a quiet longing lingered in the corners of his mind, a hope for laughter echoing through the house, for little hands tugging at his sleeve, for someone to call his own. That hope, buried under years of caution, was suddenly unearthed one harsh evening when the sky burned orange with the fading sun and a figure appeared at the edge of his property. It was a woman, worn down by hardship and fear, clutching the hands of 7 small children, whose eyes held a mixture of suspicion and hope. They had come running from cruel relatives, desperate to escape a life of oppression and humiliation, and the sight of them stirred something long dormant in the cowboy's protective instinct, a spark of empathy, and a flicker of longing he had tried so hard to suppress. For a moment, he hesitated, feeling the weight of responsibility and the fear of opening his heart once more. Yet, the vulnerability in their eyes, the silent plea for refuge, broke through his walls. He led them inside, offering warmth, shelter, and safety, aware that this simple act of kindness might change everything about his life. Little did he know that in opening his home and his heart to a mother and her children, he was setting in motion a series of events that would challenge his solitude, test his courage, and ultimately redefine what family meant to him. The ranch, once a place of quiet routine, was about to become a home filled with laughter, worry, tears, and love, the beginnings of a life he had only dared imagine in the quiet moments of his own heart. The woman's story unfolded slowly, like a fragile thread she was afraid might break if pulled too hard, revealing the cruel life she had endured at the hands of her late husband's family. After his death, instead of compassion or support, she had faced contempt and cruelty. The in-laws treated her and her 7 children as burdens, as if their very existence was a shameful obligation, their presence an insult to the family's pride. Every day had been a battle to protect her children from verbal abuse, menacing threats, and neglect, leaving them hungry, frightened, and desperate for love and security. She had planned to endure it in silence, hoping that obedience and patience might shield her family, but the cruelty had only escalated, forcing her to flee in the dead of night with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the bond that tied them together. Standing at the cowboy's gate, her body tense from months of fear and exhaustion, she allowed herself the faintest glimmer of hope, though it was mingled with deep skepticism. After all, who in this harsh world would willingly help a broken, hunted family? The cowboy, weathered by life yet unexpectedly gentle, offered them shelter, setting boundaries for a temporary stay, a simple promise of safety without overstepping the fragile trust she had built to protect her children. At first, the children hung back, their wide eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings, unsure whether the promise of safety was real or just another cruel trick. Slowly, cautious smiles replaced fearful glances as they explored the ranch, learning to trust the man who fed them, tended to their wounds, and allowed them a space to breathe and be children again. The mother watched quietly, relief mingling with lingering fear, as she realized that this stranger, this cowboy who lived so alone, and yet so steadfast, was offering them more than just a roof. He was offering respect, dignity, and protection, qualities she had long thought lost to them. Each passing day chipped away at the layers of fear and suspicion, allowing bonds to form soft, bonds built on quiet acts of kindness, shared chores, and the subtle understanding that they had, for the first time in a long while, found someone who would stand by them unconditionally. The woman's heart, once heavy with despair, began to recognize the possibility of safety, of hope, and of healing, though the shadow of her past lingered, reminding her that trust was earned, slowly and carefully, in a world that had so often denied it. As the days unfolded on the cowboy's sprawling ranch, the 7 children began to rediscover the simple joys they had almost forgotten: laughter, play, and the feeling of safety. The youngest clung to his mother's hand. At first, hesitant to trust anyone outside the harsh world they had fled, while the older ones cautiously explored the boundaries of their new environment, testing fences, climbing hills, and peeking into barns, as if claiming territory that had long been denied to them. Each small task, the cowboy assigned feeding chickens, mending fences, gathering firewood, was more than a chore. It became a lesson in responsibility, self-reliance, and the quiet dignity of contributing to a home that welcomed them without judgment. With every act of care the cowboy showed, whether fixing a torn coat or patiently teaching a child how to ride a horse, he unwittingly earned their trust and admiration. The children began to laugh freely, chasing each other through open fields, their joyous voices echoing off the hills, and stirring a warmth in the cowboy's chest he had thought lost forever. Slowly, he found himself observing them more than he spoke to them, marveling at the resilience hidden in their small frames and the courage they displayed, despite all they had endured. The mother watched these moments with a cautious relief, grateful for the sanctuary the cowboy had provided, yet still protective, aware that the wounds of past cruelty could reopen at any misstep. But day by day, the children's innocence began to bloom again, bringing light not only to the ranch but to the cowboy's heart, which had long been shrouded in solitude. He began to feel a sense of belonging that surprised him, a subtle but profound realization that the presence of these children and their mother was reshaping his world. Their laughter, once a distant memory, became the soundtrack to his life, filling corners of the ranch and chambers of his heart he had long thought empty. In quiet moments, he would watch them sleeping, small and peaceful, and feel a protective surge so strong it left him breathless, a bond forming that transcended words. It was here, amid chores, laughter, and the fragile rebuilding of trust, that the first seeds of family were planted, seeds that promised growth, resilience, and the possibility that even a lonely cowboy could learn to love again. In nurturing them, he discovered that family wasn't just something he had dreamed of, it was something he could now live, breathe, and protect with every ounce of his being. As the days turned into weeks, the cowboy found himself struggling with feelings he hadn't dared to acknowledge in years: a quiet, persistent affection for the mother of the 7 children he had taken in. She moved through the ranch with a gentle strength, managing the children, keeping the house in order, and facing each day with courage he couldn't help but admire. Every small gesture, a soft laugh, a glance of gratitude, the way she reassured the children after a rough day, pierced the walls he had built around his heart, awakening desires he thought were long buried under loneliness. And yet, both of them were careful, bound by unspoken fears. She feared trusting someone who might leave, someone whose kindness could disappear as suddenly as it had appeared, while he feared opening himself to the possibility of love again, knowing the past had taught him how devastating it could be to care too much. Their interactions were cautious, laden with subtle glances, fleeting touches, and the kind of quiet communication that spoke volumes without words. He found himself lingering near her when he had no real reason to, noticing the curve of her smile or the softness in her voice when she spoke to the children, feeling a warmth he hadn't known in years. She, in turn, found herself relying on him more than she had intended, grateful for his steadfast presence, his unwavering protection, and the way he made her children laugh with ease, a stark contrast to the fear they had lived under before. The ranch, once a place of simple survival and quiet routine, became a stage for the subtle dance of 2 hearts slowly learning to trust one another. The space between them charged with a tension that neither could fully name. Every shared glance, every moment of mutual understanding, seemed to carry the weight of all the unspoken words they feared to speak aloud. And yet, even as they tried to maintain a careful distance, their connection deepened, as though the universe had placed them together to heal old wounds, to show that even in the harshest of landscapes love could take root and grow. The cowboy, once resigned to solitude, found his mind wandering toward possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to imagine, while she discovered that the thought of losing him, the protector, the steady hand, the quiet presence she had come to rely upon, was a fear far greater than any she had faced before. In the quiet moments of evening, as the sun set over the rolling hills and the children slept peacefully, they would sometimes find themselves sharing the same space, hearts beating in unison, yet still separated by the invisible barrier of caution and past pain, each aware that what was blossoming between them was fragile, precious, and worth protecting at all costs. The fragile peace that had begun to settle over the ranch was suddenly threatened when the woman's cruel in-laws returned, their arrival like a storm tearing through the calm the family had fought so hard to achieve. They came with demands, accusations, and threats, insisting that the children and their mother were their property, claiming rights over inheritance, land, and even custody, as if the bonds of blood alone gave them power over hearts and lives. The cowboy, who had learned to live with quiet solitude and self-reliance, felt a surge of protective fury he hadn't known he possessed, stepping forward to shield the family from the harassment and intimidation that had haunted them for years. He met the in-laws with a quiet but unyielding authority, refusing to allow them to dictate terms or reclaim what he now considered under his protection. The woman watched with a mix of relief and apprehension, realizing in that moment just how fiercely he would defend them, not because he owed them anything, but because he had chosen to care, and his care was unwavering. The children, sensing the tension and understanding the danger, clustered close to their mother, eyes wide with both fear and awe, witnessing the cowboy transform from quiet guardian to unshakable defender, someone who would stand between them and harm without hesitation. Words were exchanged, sharp and cutting, but the cowboy's calm resolve was a shield none could pierce. His voice, firm yet steady, carried the weight of someone who would not back down, someone who had found strength in the love and trust of those who depended on him. In that confrontation, the mother felt a surge of emotion. She hadn't expected: gratitude, awe, and the first true spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, a life free from fear was possible. And in witnessing this, the cowboy himself felt the depth of his own transformation. He was no longer a solitary figure wandering the ranch with only memories for company. He had become the center of a family, someone whose courage and love mattered profoundly to others, whose choices could protect and shape the lives of those he had come to care for deeply. The standoff ended without violence, but the tension lingered like smoke in the air, a reminder that the outside world was still dangerous, and that the bonds they had begun to forge must be guarded fiercely. Yet amid the lingering fear, there was also a glimmer of triumph. He had faced the threat, stood firm, and proved that for the first time in years, the woman and her children had a protector who would never falter. In that moment, the unspoken truth became clear to everyone. The cowboy was no longer alone, and neither was the family he had chosen to shelter. After the tense confrontation with the in-laws, life on the ranch slowly began to settle into a rhythm of safety, work, and small joys, yet the children could not ignore the bond that had quietly formed between their mother and the cowboy. They had watched him protect them, feed them, and teach them. And they had seen how their mother's eyes softened around him, how her laughter returned, tentative but genuine, when he was near. The children, wise beyond their years in matters of heart, began to sense that this man was more than just a temporary guardian. He was someone who could fill the empty spaces of their lives, someone who could offer love and stability they had been denied for so long. Late one evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the sky turned a deep, bruised purple, the children gathered in a huddle, whispering urgently among themselves. They shared their observations, their hopes, and their fears, realizing that if they did not act, the fleeting chance for their family to be whole might slip away. Each child contributed their own thoughts. The eldest worried about being heard, the middle ones worried about consequences, and the youngest simply wanted everyone to be happy. They hatched a plan, simple yet brave, born from love and desperation. They would ask the cowboy to stay, not just as a protector or friend, but as a father figure, as someone who would bind their fractured family together. The idea terrified and thrilled them at once. It felt daring to take such a step. But they were determined because they had experienced firsthand how life could turn cruel without someone to stand firm, how fleeting safety could be without care and protection. They rehearsed their words quietly, practicing how to speak with honesty and courage, knowing that the outcome could change everything. Each child felt a mix of excitement and anxiety, their hearts pounding with the weight of responsibility. But their love for their mother and their longing for a home filled with warmth and stability gave them courage. By the time the night deepened and the stars blinked in the cold sky above the ranch, the children were ready. They understood that what they were about to do was more than a request. It was a declaration of love, trust, and hope, a gamble with their hearts that carried the power to shape the family's future forever. And though they could not fully grasp the impact of their actions, they knew in that moment that they were acting from the deepest place of their innocence and love, a place strong enough to reach even the most guarded heart of the lonely cowboy. The moment the children had been preparing for finally arrived, a quiet evening on the ranch, when the fire flickered in the hearth and the shadows danced across the walls, lending a sense of intimacy and urgency to their mission. One by one, the 7 children approached the cowboy, their small hands trembling slightly, and their voices barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of courage and hope born from months of fear and longing. They stood before him, a united front of innocence and sincerity, and in unison they spoke the words they had practiced so carefully. "Please, marry our mama." The cowboy froze, caught off guard by the purity and boldness of their plea. A mixture of astonishment, disbelief, and an overwhelming surge of emotion flooding his heart. He looked from one child to another, seeing the trust and longing mirrored in their wide, earnest eyes, and then up at their mother, who had silently appeared in the doorway, her own expression a mix of surprise, hesitation, and a glimmer of hope. The room seemed to hold its breath as the weight of the moment settled over them all. A quiet tension charged with love, fear, and anticipation. The cowboy's mind raced, grappling with the enormity of their request. He had not come to the ranch expecting to fall in love, expecting to be needed so profoundly, or to be called upon to bind a family together in such a life-altering way. Yet the sincerity in the children's voices, the way they looked at him with absolute trust, broke through every barrier he had built around his heart. He could feel the depth of their longing for stability, for love, and for someone to finally step into the role of protector, mentor, and father. The mother, hearing the words she had only dared to hope for in her quietest dreams, felt a mixture of fear and relief. Fear that this new chapter could bring vulnerability, but relief that the children's hearts had chosen someone they could trust, someone who had already proven his courage and care. The cowboy's emotions swirled a storm of tenderness, responsibility, and love as he realized the gravity of the choice before him. To accept this family fully, to open his heart completely, and to transform not only the children's lives, but his own lonely existence. After a long tense silence, he knelt to meet their eyes, feeling a rush of warmth and certainty, knowing that the plea of these 7 brave children was a call he could not ignore, a moment that would forever change the trajectory of all their lives, turning their fragile hope into a promise of belonging and love. The cowboy's heart swelled as he looked at the 7 children and their mother, feeling the weight of their trust and the depth of his own newfound love. After long moments of silent reflection, he spoke softly, but with conviction, telling the mother that he would stay, not as a temporary protector or a distant friend, but as a part of their family, as someone who would care for them, love them, and stand by them through every trial and triumph. The children erupted into quiet cheers and hugs, their laughter mingling with tears of relief, joy, and wonder, as the reality of having a father figure, someone steadfast and loving, finally settled into their hearts. The mother, overwhelmed by gratitude and emotion, stepped closer to the cowboy, her hand brushing his as a silent affirmation that she too was ready to embrace this new chapter, a life filled not with fear and uncertainty, but with trust, love, and belonging. In that moment, the ranch transformed from a place of solitude and routine into a home overflowing with warmth, laughter, and the kind of bonds that heal deep wounds and bridge lonely hearts. The cowboy who had once walked through life carrying only the echoes of his own solitude, now felt the richness of family around him, the children climbing on him, asking endless questions and seeking comfort in his presence, their mother standing beside him as both partner and friend. Every corner of the house and every acre of land seemed to pulse with life, the very air filled with hope, resilience, and the promise of countless tomorrows. The past hardships of the mother and her children, the cruelty of the in-laws, and the long months of fear were finally replaced with safety, laughter, and a sense of permanence they had never known. The cowboy realized that love was not merely an abstract idea or a distant dream, but a living force capable of reshaping lives, mending hearts, and creating a family where none had existed before. Together, they shared meals, tended the land, and forged routines that reflected both joy and responsibility, learning from one another and growing stronger with each passing day. In the quiet evenings, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the stars blinked above, they would sit together by the fire, hearts connected, knowing that their lives had been forever intertwined by courage, hope, and the bravery of 7 small children who dared to ask for love. And in that home, once filled with loneliness, the cowboy finally found what he had longed for all his life: a family, complete and whole, bound not by obligation, but by choice, love, and unwavering devotion. A sanctuary where each of them belonged completely, forever.